Good news, everyone! I've just released version 3 of my procedural patterns pack, and if you've been around for a while, you know that a little while ago I released this product on Gumroad and Blender Market, which basically helps you put together procedural materials using a collection of different node groups. So there's all sorts of stuff in here. So we've got artistic patterns for getting different types of effects like grunge and imperfections and like hair and scratches and cool sticks and stuff like that. And that was basically all that the original version contained, but there's some extra stuff now. We've got some extra Voronoi family type patterns. We've got an animated effect, so this is rain, and I'll show you this. So you can get like raindrops going down a surface. We've got some mathematical patterns in the way of like hexagon and brick tiles. We've got a functional vector scattering node, which will let you randomly splat like textures or procedural images like around an object. But then at the top up here, we've got some exciting volumetric experiments, which if you've been following me on Twitter or Instagram, or even on my YouTube community, you would have seen some of these different artistic effects, and those are quite exciting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run you through the different demonstrations which I've prepared, such as this beautiful example, and this one, and this one, and most importantly this one. And even though this is a paid package, you might learn some things along the way as I show you these demonstrations. But if you are interested in picking it up, you can get it on the Gumroad or the Blender Market storefront. The easiest way to find it is by going through my website at curtisholt.online/store. There you'll see the procedural patterns, and if you click on it, it will take you to the Gumroad page. It has also been raised in price a few dollars, and that's because new content has been added to it. But of course, if you own the product beforehand, you'll get all of these updates for free. So the earlier you get it, the cheaper it'll be. Anyway, let's get started. What we're going to have a look at first. So I want to draw your attention to the collections over here in the outliner, because I've prepared these in a way to kind of visualize the different effects and procedural patterns in the most optimal way for rendering. So for example, if I disable the general display and if I turn on the volume display collection, you'll go, huh, what's this weird block here? This looks like some kind of album artwork. Basically, the volume display collection is what I use for checking out my different volume effects. If I click on the camera and press Ctrl and 0 on the numpad, it's going to focus us in because this is the camera that's been prepared for volume rendering. Now I can disable and enable different objects here, and these are used for different like use cases of previewing the different effects. So if I start off with the cube, a very basic cube, if I click on it, we'll see that the material that's been applied to it is the mask material. So the mask material contains like every single node group and effect that we have in this pack. It's like home base for the different effects, and we can compose different things in here. But importantly, you'll notice that every category in here has its own material output node. And if you click on each of these, it's going to enable them. So one by one, you can have a look at the different effects. Now I've got rain selected, but because this cube hasn't been set up for the rain, if I play the timeline, you can see the rain kind of just like falling off there because the vector information's wrong. But if I go up to the volume demos and click on one of these, then we get some results. Now I'm actually going to go to the objects collection, turn off the bright light catcher and turn on the dark one. So that gives us a bit of better lighting. And I'm actually going to change the color management to standard, so we get some more vibrant colors. So with this cube, we can now take a look at the different presets. So here we've got cloud volume. So because I'm using cycles, whatever mesh you have, if you apply this effect to it, you're going to get this lovely, vibrant, colorful cloud volume effect going around it. And I can prove that because if I disable the cube and enable Suzanne, then we have Suzanne made out of a cloud volumes. So you can pretty much apply this to any shape that you like. So again, this sphere, perhaps a weird spiral mesh. Looks a bit candy-like now, actually. I kind of want to taste it. So yeah, and for each of these node groups, you can go in and have a look at them in more detail. So this volume effect in particular was actually made to try and test what would happen if I took the regular procedural node groups, which are already in the pack, and used them in a volumetric setting, because a lot of these have 3-dimensional data to them. Now we're used to seeing them in a 2-dimensional format when they're kind of stretched around an object, but in 3 dimensions, you can get some really interesting effects, stuff that you might not expect. And that's the whole point of this volumetric area. So for example, if I go to the Tesseract demo, inspired by the Tesseract energy source from the Marvel films, then if I let this resolve, we're going to get something quite complex and quite beautiful actually. You'll notice that for this one, there's both a surface and a volume shader output. So if you wanted, you don't have to use the surface, you can just use the volume, and we'll get this lovely kind of nebulaic, inconsistent emission type of effect, which again can be applied to any mesh that you like, but having both of them will give you the complete effect. All of these node groups have different parameters, so we could totally change the surface color of this, and also change like the emission strength, the surface roughness. So if we wanted to make it more shiny, then we can totally do that. But you'd want to balance these to get like the right kind of effect going. We can also change the hue, so we can change like the internal color. So this example could be cool for doing like all kinds of weird energy sources, which is an exact demo which I want to show you actually. So if I reset those values, I prepared an artistic demo to push these effects to the test. So if I disable the cube and then open the cable collection, then I'm going to enable these cables one by one. So the first, the second, and the third. And I'm also going to disable the regular lighting and enable the alternate cable lighting. So this lighting has been prepared pretty much for this artistic effect. Okay, so I haven't actually been doing any like actual 3D modeling for a while. So I thought, come on, it's about time I actually model something. So I did this hard surface demonstration here to show off some of these new effects. So for the volume effects I've just shown you, I thought it'd be nice to try and use them in a science fiction setting. So if you click on each of these pipes and let's find the nodes, you see that these are all a variation of that tesseract node group. But by adjusting the values and using them in different ways, you can get different effects. So here's a little tip. For this green one up here, which looks like a kind of like biohazardy type thing with bubbles floating through it, if you intentionally do not give this node group any vector information, then you'll be able to get that bubble-like effect. That's just a side effect of not giving it data. Whereas if you do give these node groups data, like vector input data, then you'll be able to get this regular nebulaic pattern, and you can adjust the scales of those appropriately. I also thought it'd be interesting to take the new rain node group, this new animated effect in version 3, and apply it to this scene, and then I rendered it out into a nice animation, which you'll see here. Ta-da! Doesn't that look nice? Obviously the rain's not realistic here, but I just thought it was a nice stylized effect to make it feel like there's some kind of strange energetic fluid inside of this science fiction pipeline. Now of course, like I said, this demonstration is contained inside of the procedural patterns blend file that you'll get. It's just all hidden away in the right collections. So if you follow exactly what I've been doing with these collections up here, then you should be able to see exactly the same results. But anyway, there's more to show you with this artistic demonstration, because if we zoom in and take a look at the metal here, you'll see some scratches and imperfections. These have of course been made using the node groups in the pack, so if we click on these as well, looks like I've got some extra node groups to clean up, but you'll be able to see a demonstration. So this one here is made using the scratches hair node group, and I called it this because I thought the scratches also happen to look like hair, but we can adjust the different levels. So if we turn down all of these layers, we'll get fewer scratches. If we turn them up, we'll get more, obviously. But the interesting thing here is that you can combine these node groups with any other effects you like in the shader editor nodes. In this case, I have stretched out these scratches in the Y direction using the mapping node here, using the object vector input. We use the object input for pretty much most procedural materials, but by stretching it out in this direction, I thought it looked more appropriate for metal, because like as a cable's been moved around, it's probably hit things in a certain direction. So if you want to get a similar effect, that is a tip you can apply. There are the nodes. But we have different imperfections on this surface, so if we click on that, we can see that this is a combination of the imperfection layers node, which is actually one of my favorite nodes for getting surface imperfections. It's because it's different effects stacked up on top of each other, and it just, from a distance, it creates like a nice illusion of a slightly dirtified surface. And of course, maybe you can pass this through a math node, like I've done here, to control the influence of it on different values, such as the roughness. In this case, it's been combined with the scratches paint node, which is a different method of getting scratch-like effects. It's very different from the scratches hair. I called it scratches paint because, again, like the other one reminded me more of hair, this one reminds me more of a paint-like effect. So I kind of name things on their kind of visual comparisons. So combining both of these techniques with a principal BSDF shader with a pretty high metallic value, 1.0, we can get these nice looking metal effects. So this is a demonstration of how you can combine different like surface imperfection nodes and volumetric artistic effect nodes to get a nice looking piece of artwork. Again, because it's all procedural, you can just drag the nodes on and get nice results right away. That's why I love using procedural materials rather than image texture materials. But Curtis, what if I like using image textures? Well, I've got you covered. Let's head on back to the general display collection. Actually, no, hold it. I missed something out. Before I talk about the scatter node, which is where we're heading with this, there's one more thing I need to show in the volume display. If I disable my cable collection, reset the original lighting, bring up the monolith object. So this, which we were about to accidentally skim over, is one of the most complex shaders I've ever made. I've called it the black wall. This is in reference to a fictional project I did a few years back. I'm not going to say exactly what it means, but just to give you like a quick demonstration, a black wall is like this kind of obsidian-like material which connects different realities. But anyway, this node group, which has been packaged in and has been marked as an asset so you can drag it into your own blend files, combines a variety of the different procedural surface nodes and the different volume effects to create an extremely complex surface. So basically, this cube has a randomized interior volume effect, and I can prove this if we fly into it. It's going to be very bright, so get ready for this. Whoa! If I let this kind of resolve, you can see the extremely bright volumetric energy flying through this mesh. Zooming back out, we have the obsidian-like surface with these procedural surface imperfections. But more than that, we have these procedural patterns cutting over the surface, and as they're doing that, they're kind of opening it out, and we can see through into the volume. This is controlled by this value down the bottom called universe bleed. The idea behind this is that you're starting to see a different reality kind of bleeding through the surface. So if I put that down to 0, we get almost nothing. It's semi-transparent, you can kind of see like the indications of a whispering volume coming through the surface there with this blue light. But as I increase the value, it might be difficult to see with the noise. So if I turn on the denoising, this might help us. But if I turn up the value, you can start to see these patterns cutting in to the surface. So we start getting these cracks, and as we're doing that, more light is bleeding through. So I think this one might be a really interesting example for people to take a look at, to see how you can combine these in really complex ways. This is personally my favorite node group in the entire pack, but it is super complex and very heavy to render. This is something I'll probably end up using for my own personal projects. That's why I've given it a more personal name in reference to one of my own like previous fictional projects, but I feel like it'll be useful in your hands as well. Now, if you've been around for a while, you know that sometimes we like improvising, and though I still do have a lot of stuff to show you, let's take a moment to improv and see what I can do with this node. So if I turn down the universe bleed a bit, so we've got the basic surface, let me maybe turn up the surface color. That's looking pretty cool. I think that now that the surface is brighter, it's letting more of the volume come through. I really like that. It's like some sci-fi tablet. We can turn up the metallic value for the surface, and in doing that, it looks like more of the imperfections are being shown to us, but I think that might be a bit too much. So I'm going to turn that down a bit more. By adjusting the surface scale, you can change the scale level of the imperfections on the surface. It'll be a bit difficult to see with this denoising, but we can also adjust the volume scale. And in doing that, we can make the internal effect more higher frequency or lower frequency. If I put it on 0, then we're basically just going to get like the volume encompassing the entire mesh, which is a bit too much. If I turn it up slightly, then you'll be able to see like the individual waves of the volume in there. This looks kind of cool. Let me turn up the metallic now a bit, maybe turn the brightness down or give it a different color like orange. Ooh, okay, I like this. If we turn up the universe bleed a bit more, then we're getting more cracks through the surface, and I don't know what this is, but this is super satisfying to me. We can change the emission strength of the internal volume as well, so if I turn that down to 0, we've got nothing because there's no light to bleed out, although the surface still looks cool. But maybe let me turn it up to something really extreme, like 1000, and now it seems like something is trying to break through. So yeah, I really like this one. If you want to play around with it, it's in the pack. But anyway, this is a good tangent onto what I was going to talk to you about, which is the scatter node, because that's also being used here. So the scatter node essentially gives you like randomized vector data to let you scatter image content, whether it's like an actual image texture or procedural textures around an object. This can help to break up repetition for things which are not seamless. This is also a callback to a previous video I did, which was something like making complex materials from basic images. Can't remember the actual title, but in that video I made some really beautiful looking materials using just pretty low resolution screen grabs of other images. They weren't seamless or anything like that. You can just literally get any image you like, take a screen grab, and use it in a material and create something complex from it. Now in that video, I learned how to make these vector scattering nodes from Jonathan Lampell's video, which I highly recommend you go and watch. And he basically made a product called Scattershot, which does pretty much the same thing, but in a much more complex way than mine does. Mine is but a pale imitation of his work. But I thought it'd be an important type of node to include because it's super useful. In the case of this example, I'm using the scatter node to randomize these scratch effects. Now they were already like non-repeating. If I take a look in here and go to where the vectors are plugged in, the scratches here, the imperfection layers, the splashes coffee, these were already non-repeating, but I thought by using the scatter node it would disrupt them even more, so we'd get even more randomization on the surface, and you can actually see that pretty clearly. But this is again a more complex example, so I'm going to show you a more simplified example just to drive home how useful it can be. So if you're following along, we're going to disable the volume display, disable the dark light catcher, enable the light one, turn on the general display, click on the camera, control 0 on the numpad, and then let's go back and click on one of these objects and then click on the material output by artistic patterns. So we're now going to a much more easier thing to render. So we're basically back at home base, as I called it earlier, the mask material where we have all of our different options. We're going to move over to functional nodes, this little category over here. And here you can see I've got the scatter node plugged into another one of the new nodes, which is dots. And if I click on the material output here, you can see how we have a collection of dots randomly scattered and kind of blending together. It's almost like a kind of bokeh or bokeh or however you want to pronounce it effect, but this is actually quite different to how the dots node group looks by itself. So for example, if I take the object texture coordinate input here and just plug that straight into the dots effect, you'll see that we have just dots, like exactly as it says. And we have perfect control over this. We can scale them, we can adjust the randomness, so they are completely in alignment here. And as we increase the randomness, they change their size and their position, so they become less predictable. We can also adjust the strength value as well, so we can fade them in and out. We can change the individual size of the dots. And if we adjust the steps value, as we increase this, we basically create a gradient like around the dots. And you can use that for all kinds of tune effects. I think people with trypophobia might have been annoyed by that demonstration, so I cut away from it quickly. And just for reference, that dots node group is available in the new Voronoi family. So these are a collection of new patterns based around the Voronoi generative effects. We can take a look at these in more detail in a bit. But basically, if you imagine that these dots are a texture, like an image texture, then if we replace the object, the vector input, with the scatter node, it randomizes them even more. They're now kind of layered on top of each other. The lines in between where they should be have been disrupted, they're blended, and we have full procedural control over this. So I can adjust the edge blur value to make it more or less blurry. We can adjust the edge warping value as well. So basically it's creating these different cells, which the image content is being kind of displaced, discaled, sure, let's invent a new word, kind of moved around in to disrupt it. So for example, if you had like a grass texture that wasn't seamless, you could place that in and it's going to distribute that grass around these different cells and kind of rotate it so it doesn't look so uniform. So we can take a look at that here. If I adjust the random scale value, you'll be able to see how those dots are kind of adjusting in scale in different areas. We can also adjust the random rotation and location, of course. So this is randomizing our input. We can adjust the individual scale as well. So this is inside of the cells and the general pattern scale. So that's everything all together. It's a super useful technique. Thank you, Jonathan, for making such an excellent video to help me learn more about it. Now, like I said, you can plug any type of regular texture into that, which I don't have here because this is the procedural patterns pack, not the image texture pattern pack, but just trust me, it works the same. So since I mentioned the Voronoi family of patterns, let's take a look at what else we have here. Oh, and also I should say, you might be wondering why these patterns fade off in certain areas of the mesh or why it fades off there. It's because I have my custom display node here called procedural patterns display. And basically this uses ambient occlusion to restrict the placement of the pattern. If I bypass this, so for example, if I took the currently active node group Salt Lake and just skipped that node and went straight to the material output, you'll see it as it actually is on the mesh. But the reason why I'm using an ambient occlusion mask inside of my custom node here is just to give us a bit of visual variety when previewing the effects, just a little bit. So since we've got it active, let's talk about this one, Salt Lake. Basically, when people are using the Voronoi generated textures, they like to use a combination of different categorical types and values to get a wide range of effects. So what I've done is I've taken some of the most common effects, which I've seen people using, and just put them into basic node groups here for like quick shortcut access. This one's called Salt Lake because it reminds me of those dry salt beds, which you see like across America and different parts of the world, where ancient lakes have dried up and they've left salt deposits on the ground. And those tend to dry up into these cells, which look very similar to this type of Voronoi pattern. So of course we can adjust the scale and the thickness of the lines there, and the randomness as well, so we can make them all line up into perfect grids or completely randomize them. And we have the strength value, so all very self-explanatory, all very procedural. Then over here we have the stars pattern. If I plug that in, then we have lovely stars. How nice. So again, we have all the similar values. We can adjust the scale, the randomness, the size, the strength, and the steps if you want to get like more of a gradient effect around the stars. If I zoom in, you can see that there. How very lovely. Then we have the dots one, which we've already taken a look at. And then we have this leafy one because it looks a bit leafy. Like how else will I explain that? Like there are a few leaves scattered around. So that's the Voronoi family of shortcut nodes. What next? The rain or the tiles? Let's do the tiles. Okay, so we have the massive thanks to Charon from Just 3D Things. His brain is a lot more mathematical than mine. I'm very like visual and abstract, and when making materials and stuff, I don't need to focus in on like the super objective mathematical side of like structuring patterns. That's more his kind of thing. So I go to him for advice, and he was nice enough to contribute contribute these node groups, and by contribute I mean I paid him. I say I paid him a bit of money. I would have liked to have given him much more, but that's the whole point of like updating these products. I want to reinvest the money I make from these back into other creators to contribute more, so like we keep reinvesting and making more content. So if you do buy this pack, which I will really appreciate it, just know that the intention is to try and reinvest some of that money back into not just this project but other creative projects as well, to create more Blender resources for all of you. Anyway, to visualize these nodes, I'm going to disable the general display and enable the wall display. As you can expect, this one is for displaying walls. So I press Ctrl and then 0 on the numpad to enable this camera, and I'm actually going to go and set the render to 1920 by 1080 because that's what this camera was designed for. You'll notice that we're staring at bricks. I mean, they look nice, but why are we staring at bricks? Let me disable the denoising quickly. We're staring at bricks because this is one of the demonstration materials called black bricks. There are other demonstration materials as well, and if I bring up my asset browser quickly, let's take a look at that. I have personally set up my categories to have materials and shader node groups, and we can look at procedural patterns in both of these. So these are all the node groups in procedural patterns, which if you added this blend file to your asset library, you'll be able to see these in your asset browser. You can see here that we have template materials as well. Now, this isn't technically a material pack, it's like a node group pack, but how could I give you node groups without making you some demonstration materials? So that's what these are. You can drag these onto your objects and start using them in your artwork. So we have a few different brick demonstrations. This one is the black bricks. I love dark brick and tile surfaces, stuff that's like much more closer to kind of like earthy styles. I was actually speaking to another Blender creator, Wilson, the other day about how much I like dark rocky styles in bathrooms. Sorry, it's a bit of a weird tangent, but that's why I've made like a black brick experiment anyway. If you click on that material, you'll be able to see how the brick tiles have been used in combination with other effects, again from the same pack, Imperfection layers, which we saw earlier, to create a lovely surface like this. Now, this is actually using adaptive subdivision, which essentially tessellates the geometry and gives depth to the material surface. Now, you don't have to use this. The way you do use it if you want to is if you make sure cycles is enabled with the experimental feature set. If you go down to the modifiers, if you have the subdivision surface modifier applied to an object, then if you have adaptive subdivision ticked, then depending on the dicing scale here and the subdivision render settings dicing scales here, so dicing rate for the render and viewport, the lower it is, the more geometry will be generated. Then it will create geometry and bring it out depending on the displacement data which has been passed to the shader. Wow, okay, sorry. Those were a couple of really complex sentences, especially for someone that's new to Blender. So I'm sorry if you are new and that was a bit heavy. It means that we can take the same data being used to create like the lovely color and patterns of the surface to also bring extra geometry onto it. If I turn my dicing scale down slightly, let me do 0.5, then we'll be able to see more detail in the brick surfaces. So like the border between the bricks now has more definition, and you can see how we can use this for like architectural visualization. Again, because it's all procedural, genuinely, we can change the values on this brick tiles node and then watch as the shape of the brick changes. Maybe if I change the mortar width, that's going to thicken out the mortar in between. If I get a bit of a harsher angle here, by changing the random height value, we can essentially change like some variation in how far the bricks come out. So you can increase that as well. And it might be very slight, but you'll be able to see that some of these bricks are a bit more indented than others. So this is more for adding just like a touch of realism. Let me reduce the mortar width now because I don't really like having it too thick. The bevel strength in this node is essentially like how angled that bevel is going to be for the bricks. I like to keep it fairly high because I think that's a bit more modern because, you know, newer bricks have more defined corners to them. We can also change the rounding of them as well. So if I turn that up, this is a very extreme example. Maybe you'd like this for something stylized, but yes, you can round off the corners of the bricks. So you can get all kinds of other shapes with them. So of course, let's just leave that on something very subtle. Very subtle. So now we have a lovely wall of bricks, and I love like from lower angles here, if you get the light bouncing off of it, the specularity, this looks fantastic. But of course, this is not just the brick tiles alone. There are other things going on here. So as you can see here, we have one of my favorite nodes, like I said, the Imperfection layers, plugging in, giving us color, mixing with some ambient occlusion. This stuff over here, it looks a bit more complex than it actually is. It's basically just for like getting a darker gradient coming from the bottom of this plane, as if some dirt has accumulated there. there. So you might just be able to see through the noise there as I drag this handle back and forth. There's like this darker gradient going up and down. You don't need to worry too much about that. But if we take the imperfection layers detail here and pass it through a bump node and then through the normal, that is what gives us this extra brick-like surface pattern actually on the surface of the bricks. Okay, so that's the brick tiles. Now there are a couple of other nodes which Charon contributed for us. So let me see what happens if I press shift right click and slice those noodles there and bring in the hexagon tiles. I haven't actually tried this yet. This might look horrible, but we'll see. So if I plug the height in there, oh, that actually looks really, really cool. Fantastic. So we have now replaced the brick tiles with the hexagon tiles node group. So we are getting a different pattern. Nice. I could definitely see myself using this for something in the future. So we can do the random height thing again for this to get a little bit of variation coming out. That's quite nice. A bit more mortar width maybe, just to let some more of that come through. I am controlling the color of the mortar here. Let me do something very different, give that a blue, make that like much brighter. We're getting something very Tron-like now. But yeah, hopefully you can see that just by modifying a few nodes, using a few different node groups, we can get quite a wide variety of material results. So yeah, hopefully you enjoyed this video. Wait, that's not the end. There's one more thing to show you. Let's disable the wall display collection and go to the effect display. And then we're going to choose this camera, control 0 on the numpad, and have a look. We're also going to disable the bright light catcher, go for the dark one, and then we're going to change this render resolution to 2000 by 2000 because this camera is intended for a 1:1 aspect ratio. For this one as well, I'm going to replace my asset browser window with the timeline so we can scrub this back and forth, and that's because of course the rain effect is animated. If I click on this plane, we have the rain shader here and also a rain blend shader. And technically we don't need this principled BSDF, so I might get rid of that just to simplify things. But here is how the node groups work. You're going to plug a texture coordinate, whatever it may be. For our procedural systems, we're going to use generated for this rain shader. This rain shader gives us a few different outputs. There is an actual shader output, a mask, which is essentially just a white and black representation of the raindrops. Then we're going to take a custom shader. So this is our actual material that we want the rain to fall on. And we're going to blend these two things together. So we have our original shader plus the rain, and then we can control the strength of how these are blended. But when we do this, we're going to want to make sure that the mask is also plugged in here. And then we can see the raindrops. We can control the rain strength here as well. So you see that they're harder to see when it's at 0. They're easier to see when it's at 1. And then if we zoom in here, we can see them there on the surface. And then I can scrub the timeline along and watch them drizzle down. You can see that if I take the glass just by itself, there's nothing. If I take the rain blend output, then we have the raindrops. Now these raindrops are animated by a driver. So if I actually went into the rain node group, you'll be able to see this value here controlled by a driver. If I click on it, you'll see that it's frame or hashtag frame divided by 4. So it's going to move like a quarter of the speed of the timeline pretty much. So if I go back to the beginning of the timeline and press play, then we'll be able to see them dripping down. Now there are still improvements to be made for this rain shader. Charon has let me know there are a few things which need to be changed. So for example, though some of the raindrops have a perfect shape to them, some of them have a kind of disproportionately scaled end point. So for example, I think I can find one here. You see where the end point here is not perfect. It's not really noticeable from far away, but if you go up close it is, and he assures me that he will fix it soon, but I just needed to make you aware of that. And also you'll notice that all of the raindrops start kind of on the same row at the beginning, but very soon afterwards, their position is visibly randomized. So you just need to be aware of that beginning point. There are some values here on the node group we can take a look at. So an important one to keep in mind here is the path distortion value. You'll notice that the raindrops are perfectly straight when it's at 0, but if I increase this, then we'll start to see some wobbling in the shape of them. You can also change the base color of the raindrops as well. So I guess this would be useful if you wanted to add some extra stylization or adjust it in reaction to some other lighting in your scene. So yeah, that's the raindrops. To try and close this up, I'm going to put the most pretty thing I have back on the screen. Let's go back to that camera. All right, so I've come back to my monolith with the black wall node group. But anyway, yes, hopefully you found this interesting. I know this may not be accessible to everyone because this is a paid product, but I give away so much other stuff for free as well. If you are looking for free content, maybe check out our community material pack. That seems to be quite popular. It's full of materials contributed by the community, all of them procedural as well, and you can learn so much from them. But if you want to support me and my projects and also help me to reinvest some of the money into other Blender content, then feel free to pick this up on either Gumroad or Blender Market. I'll leave links below. And if you do make something cool with this, please show me because I'd love to see what you can make. But there are other ways to support me. You can sign up to my Patreon where you can get access to some exclusive files. You can get your name put put permanently on this evolving piece of artwork, which you show at the end of all of my main channel videos. So basically, even if you stop supporting, your name will still be on there as like a permanent record of your help. We do also have the super thanks enabled on this channel, so if you like any video in particular and you want to give a tip, then you can use that. And also I have a second channel where I put some extra content, more discussion related, and some behind the scenes stuff, so you can always check that out if you like. But otherwise, if you made it this far, the emoji for this video is going to be sparkles, because they look kind of like the stars pattern we looked at, and I just think it's kind of appropriate because a lot of the stuff I've been showing you is very like kind of ethereal and, you know, bright and lovely. But anyway, if you put that emoji in the comments, I'll be able to see who made it this far through the video. It's also the easiest way to get the YouTube like from me. But anyway, thanks for watching everyone. Pick up a copy. I promise not every video is going to be an advertisement from now on, and I do have some extra free stuff coming for you in the future. But you know how I don't like taking many sponsorships on this channel. I just don't like other companies telling me like what to say and what type of content to make. So this type of content is the compromise. It supports me more directly, and I feel like this is better for the community anyway. So yeah, thanks for watching everyone. Have a fantastic day. Happy blending, and I will see you next time.